Let's get hyped. Welcome into the Husker247 HypeCast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson. We are Husker247. It is Rutgers week. The Cleveland Guardians are in the playoffs, and so I thought, who better to have on this week than a man who would wear a very similar hat to my own, Nick Handley. Do you want to talk Guardians, or should we talk Nebraska Rutgers?
Let's just talk about who we're going to get starting on Saturday. Are you more pro Detroit or pro Houston? Because I'm liking what I saw in Detroit.
We're recording this on Wednesday. Detroit could already have things wrapped up by the time people hear it. I too would rather see Detroit, partly because I think I just have this Houston. I want nothing to do with Houston, but I would take Detroit there. Do you guys have thoughts? BC, you know the AL Central. Who should the Guardians rather play? The Tigers or Houston?
You should rather play Houston. Yeah, Detroit's on a heater, man. They're dangerous.
Did you see what happened in the regular season weekend, though? The regular season finale, Houston swept them.
I'm just saying.
They're on a heater, and they're not ready to go up to the hotel room yet. So I think you want Houston. I think Houston's cooked.
This is a conversation about a series that will already be settled by the time this is airing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's talk about a game that won't have started yet. And by that, we get Rutgers, Nebraska. Rutgers has never beaten Nebraska. So we'll throw that out there, and that can hang over the rest of the show, the rest of your weekend. It's like when you get the statistic that so-and-so hasn't missed a free throw in his last however many attempts, or a quarterback hasn't thrown an interception in his last 200-some attempts, but then he takes on the Minnesota Vikings and his first pass picked off, and those sorts of things. So, Nebraska's never lost to Rutgers coming into this weekend. Should be a really interesting game. Let's just jump right into it, and we'll start on the offensive side of the ball. And we'll start with Nick Handley. And this is a pretty common question I ask all of our weekly guests, but every week he's been doing something different, something unique, something that makes him stand out, something that we really haven't seen a lot of in Nebraska football. Give me your thoughts on Dylan Raiola and what you've seen through 5 games, his first road game this past weekend at Purdue.
I don't even know why I thought this would be something to watch in West Lafayette, but just his overall demeanor. And what was kind of good about it is the offense is moving the football in the first half, but they're getting no points to show for it. A lot of struggles with the special teams and just an ability to get anything inside the 20 and punch it in. His demeanor never changed. I don't know what he's like in the locker room at halftime, the conversations he's even having on the sideline, but his body language never changed. Whether they were, you could have told me that they were up by 28 points or down by 28 points. Nothing looked different. And I think that served him well in the second half. So for me, it wasn't a physical thing of can he make certain throws in this game against that defense or anything like that. It was more of not that Ross-Ade Stadium, and you guys were there, not that Ross-Ade Stadium provides the biggest overwhelming road type of atmosphere that you're going to feel like everyone's on top of you, but just taking him out of the comforts of that routine as a true freshman and to see if there's any change, the way that he goes about managing the offense. And again, dealing with frustration on the road in a game that was very important for Nebraska. It's just another box to check that, man, that's impressive for a young, true freshman with the weight of the world on him.
Sorry, I was muted there. My own mistake. I apologize. BC, Nebraska didn't score in the first half. It was the first time through 5 games that they didn't have double digits in the first half. It's the first time we've really seen the offense struggle in the opening portion of the game. Does that give you any concern moving into the Rutgers week, or do you feel like the issues Nebraska kind of ran into offensively on Saturday against Purdue, where they were moving the ball, they just weren't getting points? Do you think that could still hang over and affect them as they take on the Scarlet Knights this weekend?
The first half didn't give me concern about the offense as much because they had 210 yards. So I felt like, as you mentioned, they could move it. The thing that's going to be key that they have to eliminate are those small errors that are big errors, like the false start on 4th and 1 or 3rd and 1. You interrupt 2 drives with things of that nature. And also, I wonder how much they've thought this week about specific scenarios, like if it's 3rd and 7, for instance, on the 26-yard line of Rutgers, usually if you feel good about your kicking game, you're playing for the sticks and all that. Is it more so of a mindset in this game where you're playing to like set yourself up for 4th and 2, maybe, like you're looking at it as it's always going to be a 4-down situation. So sort of the first half and how it played out in West Lafayette makes me ponder a couple of those like in-game strategies that Nebraska will have to consider this week. But I'd be more concerned if like the offense had gone out at West Lafayette and, couldn't get a first down for a quarter. And that wasn't the case. So you're encouraged that at least they're moving the ball. Now they just got to finish better in the red zone.
Bruntz, the conversation pretty much all week. How does Nebraska utilize Emmett Johnson moving forward with what they saw against Purdue? And do you think with that conversation, you see a reduction in how much Dante Dowdell gets the ball, or just sort of an increase in effort in getting Emmett Johnson the ball?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because it feels like there's like a pool of running back carries, and I don't get the sense that pool is growing a lot. Like, if anything, Ja'Cory Barney's kind of sucking a few carries off. You've got Carter Nelson apparently carrying the ball now. There's kind of gadgety type plays. Heinrich Harburg, I guess. Those guys are taking some of those carries. If you're kind of looking at the way that those 3 backs are going to kind of divide things up, it feels like to me that Emmett Johnson, because he kind of does a lot of similar things to Ramir Johnson, would kind of be taking from there. So do we see Emmett Johnson earlier? I think so. I think this is a game where Nebraska is going to need to really be pretty decisive in how it runs the ball. I don't think this is the kind of game where you're going to be able to kind of dance around and find the hole. You just got to go. And I think that's what Emmett Johnson's always done well, is he's always been a pretty decisive runner. He makes quick cuts, and he I think runs a little bit heavier than he is. So I think you'll see a bigger role for him. I think there's also a little bit more for him as a receiver there as well, if Nebraska wants to kind of go that route. So I'm expecting more from him. And, it's still going to be a Dante Dowdell type game. I mean, they're going to have to run for, pick up first downs on 3rd and 2. And that's still, as I think, as where Dowdell's kind of bread and butter can be. So I guess you maybe kind of siphon a few off of Ramir, but I'm not expecting like 25 carries for Emmett Johnson or anything like that. Like I think some people would like to see. I just think it's going to be probably a little bit more even in the way that it's reflected in the depth chart, that now you have that Orr back. So you've got 3 guys there.
We'll stick with Bruntz. Bruntz, what did you see from the offensive line, in particular Gunnar Gatula in his first career start at left tackle? We heard from Marcus Satterfield, who basically just said that he gives a lot of credit to how Matt Rule prepares guys early in their career so that when these situations come, they're able to step in and perform rather seamlessly.
Yeah, I thought he held up really well. I mean, I didn't – the 2 games that he's played significant roles in, I haven't noticed that it's been a redshirt freshman in there, and I think that's probably the best compliment that you can give somebody. Personality-wise, I don't think he's ever kind of been flustered or awed by the situation. You go back to last year, he was on the 2 deep as a true freshman, even though he wasn't necessarily the next guy in. He was getting those kinds of reps. So I think he's stepped in and done really well, and that's a hard thing to do. I mean, he had a really tough matchup last week with Jenkins from Purdue, and Dylan Raiola really wasn't harassed all that much in the pass game, and I think he's been fine in the run game too. So I think he's held up remarkably well and kind of provided a little stability at a position that he was the 3rd guy that had been in there and in that left tackle role this year. So I think he's done really well, I think.
Handley, as you kind of assess Nebraska's passing game, anybody be surprised by how spread out a lot of this has been? There, you look at Nebraska's receiving leaders, nobody has 300 yards at this point. Ball's been pretty spread out between Banks, Nair, Ja'Cory Barney, Jalen Lloyd has a few, Thomas Fidone, the running backs. Does this surprise you at all? Or given the overall depth in the passing operation, is this sort of what you expected?
It actually does. It surprises me, but then when you think about it on its face, it probably shouldn't surprise really anybody. And I think there's a couple of things at play here. It's the trust that I think Dylan has with the core in its entirety. I think it's also the fact that he's getting through progressions a lot more so than we've seen. I mean, I don't even know where you would go. Maybe going all the way back to the Zach Taylor days of being able to let things develop. Bruntz just hit on, I think, a key part of it, at least in the Purdue game, is he's getting protected. He had time. He had a lot of time in that Purdue game. That's at play. But also, this is where I think, depending on who you talk to, and when it comes to Nebraska fans, if you bring up Marcus Satterfield and the play designs of getting guys open and having certain route concepts for certain guys, that he's done a good job with that. And I think this is where, and it's been kind of the conversation throughout the week of Dylan being on the same page with Marcus Satterfield, being able to provide input that he's seeing where they can input that, and I should say implement that as far as the upcoming game plan. So you are seeing a lot more spread out. I think going into the season, I just assumed that the experience of Banks and Nayor, given that they could both be healthy, they would get maybe the lion's share of the looks, and Thomas Fidone in there as well. You're starting to see Thomas Fidone come on a little bit. He's becoming a little bit more of a threat beyond 5 yards. But I don't think any of that changes. And then there's Jalen Lloyd, too, who we thought, hey, he could have a big year because as attention starts shifting over to guys like Banks and Nayor, he would be the recipient of that, where, yeah, he's been around, but it just feels like, and I think this is a good thing for Nebraska in their passing game, is I don't know if you can really key on any individual if you're an opposing defense and you're looking at certain guys like, well, we got to take him out of that game, other than really Ja'Cory Barney, who I love how creative they are in getting him the football. I just like the way that they've gone about it, but I think protection, I think Dylan's ability to process things very quickly, but also this offense lending itself to a lot of different options and variety when it comes to the pass catchers.
BC, based on what your kind of initial research this week tells you, what sort of team is Nebraska going to get with Rutgers defense?
A stingy group that will give some real estate to you, but rises up when they need to. I mean, that's sort of been their DNA to this point. Obviously, I think a lot of people watched the game Friday night where they beat Washington 21-18. They gave up 520 yards, but it's about points, not yards, ma'am, as Bo Pelini once said in a post game, and they only gave up 18. So, I know a lot's been made of their red zone defense, and those stats do look good on paper. I think they really got those stats got influenced heavily by this last game. I don't think prior to that they were just amazing. So I'm not acting like they're a vaunted monster down there, but they obviously are confident coming off of last week in what they can do when their backs are to the wall. And Nebraska is an offense that struggled in the first half last week of finishing inside the 35-yard line. So I think that's definitely a storyline in the game. It's, can Nebraska find those plays? And I think it's a game where against a defense like that, you're going to need Banks and Fidone to, make a nice catch, Nair, to go up and get one on a 50-50 ball. Cause I think it's going to be tough to get some of the other yards just as you have it drawn up on the grease board otherwise.
Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball. We'll stick with Brian Christopherson, and we will start with a guy that we heard from on Tuesday up front. Sayer Wright has been pretty good for Nebraska over the last game and a half, almost 2 full games, really, by the time he came in early against Illinois. What have you seen from him, Brian? Why do you think he's been as successful as he has been, just sort of jumping right into the mix? He didn't play a lot in those first 3 weeks of the season.
Rule said he's a really smart guy who also loves football. He's not just good at it. And I know exactly what he means there. We get this all the time with recruits who they can do well on Friday nights because they're just more talented than everybody else. But to be great at this level, you have to really kind of just have a real love for the game and want to like dissect it and figure out why these pieces work the way they do. And it sounds like Sierra Wright has a little bit of that in him. And I think the timing with him coming in at the same time as John Butler was perfect too. Like he was starting at the same time the coach did. So it wasn't like the guy who's running the secondary already had these thoughts about everybody else and had to adjust to the new player. He was adjusting to all of his players, John Butler was. So I think that helps here, right? And he's just competitive, like on every throw. He covers tight. He has confidence in himself right now. And the more you think about his experience at USC, you kind of wonder if it was more of just a overall defense. He was on a bad defense. Like, I mean, no one looked particularly great playing on that unit. And so now he's got a fresh start somewhere where they are playing pretty solid defense. And I just think it's been really good for his spirits, and you're seeing it. And he's a fun interview too. So I hope he's good, because I'd like to see him up there every week or two.
Plus, you want to be checking that IMDb page 20 years from now and being like, I watched that guy knock the ball down against Luke Altmaier.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, he got a little question. He got a couple questions about Space Jam the other day, and he handled them well.
Handley, John Bullock has been nothing short of a revelation for Nebraska defensively. What sort of stands out to you as you've watched these 5 games with how he's played? And do you think there could be a potentially even another level that he could get to, or do you think we're seeing kind of a guy at his absolute best on a heater right now?
This is it's a fascinating development, and I'll give Damon Benning credit. He brought this up on Big Red Wrap Up earlier in the week about his comfortability of playing in space. And you think about a guy that spent the early part of his college career in the secondary at that third level. And I know with 2 Viking fans here, you guys aren't going to want this comparison. And I'm not trying to compare him to this player as far as what his ceiling or trajectory is. But when you think of a guy like Brian Urlacher, who is also playing defensive back.
Yeah.
Who didn't even use Levante David. What are we doing here?
Why'd you let Nick on this show?
Hey, you guys got a better record with your Vikings, so it's okay.
Go on.
But that I think that's something that obviously serves guys making that transition very well, is when you're used to playing in space and then you're brought up to that second level. So you're a little bit closer to the action. But what we see with the game right now, when you're trying to get those matchup issues, where you're trying to get your speed, your skilled guys out in space and forcing linebackers to not only be able to make those plays, but to be sure and tacklers. Like, that's one thing that I think John Bullock, you even saw last year. He and a lot of guys on that defensive side, they swarm to the football. They get there, they make the plays. But now, even in his one-on-one opportunities, where he's not missing a whole heck of a lot at all, and now the nose to the football as well, trying to take what was the biggest emphasis in the offseason for this defense to try to capitalize on what was a good showing last year, was being able to create the turnovers. He's done all of that as well. So I think the student of the game part of it is a big part of his jump. But I think it was a great point made earlier in the week that for a guy that made that transition from the secondary to the linebacker spot and being able to play in space, and a lot of linebackers sometimes they struggle with that. I think that was a pretty seamless transition. And then as you look at his body, how he's gotten bigger in the right spots, but he still moves. He hasn't lost a step. In fact, if anything, it looks like he's maybe gained a step or two. Those things to me stand out more than anything. And so as far as the trajectory of the ceiling, I mean, guys, right now, maybe it's having a little bit more tunnel vision of seeing this team every week as opposed to every linebacker, what they're doing on every snap, but he's playing at an all Big Ten level. So as the competition ramps up, he's going to have a lot more opportunities to showcase that, and especially going up against a lot better offenses there towards the end of the year too. I think sometimes we'd say, yeah, but who have they really played? I look at it completely the opposite. I think as his game has continued to grow and he's playing with confidence, that I think if he still shows that type of ability at the level that he's at right now, I think the possibility is endless as far as the mindset that he brings in. And now some of those abilities that we've seen this year flowing to the football and being a sure-hand tackler, this is a guy that is starting to hear a little bit of the 3 letters of NFL.
Bruntz, John Bullock might have some reinforcements coming, as Javen Wright was able to play for the first time this season against Purdue. What do you kind of think about Nebraska adding Wright back into the mix, where you also have Mekhi Bear, you have John Bullock, and sort of the different things you can now do at that inside linebacker spot where, Vincent Shavers has been getting quite a bit of run in the absence of Wright as well. They now have quite a few options there at the second level.
Yeah, I'm eager to see how much they ramp up his workload, because he talked to a very small group of us after the game at Purdue and was going through the schedule and kind of how they're really, really, really being careful with how they're getting him back on the field. I mean, he's only leading up to the Purdue game was only doing walkthroughs, was not doing any full contact stuff in practice. And I mean, frankly, the reason that he was able to kind of go in there and play, pretty seamlessly, it was in part because he's a sixth-year guy. They were using him in very specific situations, more as like a dime or a nickel versus like an every down inside linebacker. So how Nebraska chooses to ramp that up, maybe you see a little bit more of him. Sounds like Steph Thompson's slowly getting back to health, and he didn't make the trip to Purdue. So I think he can be a nice piece for that defense. Maybe you play him like 15 snaps a game. You get him in where maybe you can use that athleticism a little bit more and have him in coverage or rushing after the passer. So it's a nice addition and kind of a luxury, I think, because I don't know that, a ton of people outside the walls over there were expecting to see him super soon. So you basically have him for the back half of the schedule here. And maybe he can go in there and make a play or two for you.
We're sticking with Bruntz here. Looking at Rutgers' offense, they obviously want to establish the run, and they have two very good running backs. Coming off of that Illinois game a couple weeks ago, where's your confidence level as Nebraska takes on the best rushing attack they've faced this year?
Yeah, I don't know. Mononga is a different back than what Nebraska's seen. I mean, the extent of my scouting of Rutgers came sitting and looking at my phone in a restaurant in Indiana last week, but he's kind of that. He reminds me a little bit of some of the backs that like Minnesota had a few years ago, where like
Marion Barber.
Yes, further back than that.
The Lawrence Maroney.
Yeah, but those types of backs were like you like looked up in the fourth quarter and the guy's carried the ball 20 times for 120 yards, and it doesn't really feel like he's done that. And you don't really get a clean shot on him. Like what should be a 2-yard gain ends up being a 5-yard gain. Like those types of just kind of annoying Big Ten backs. And this is going to be a different test for Nebraska. They're going to have to tackle better than they did against Illinois. I think Rutgers is able to do the play action pretty well off that. And the key is going to be whether or not Nebraska can win on first down, because if it's 2nd and 8, that's a heck of a lot manageable than 2nd and 5 or something like that. And you look at what Rutgers is coming in, they do pretty well on third down on offense. They're 17th in the country. And the passing game kind of comes off that. And we've seen Calic Manis. I mean, he can make throws in the right situations. And I think that's kind of what he's doing for Rutgers right now. He's not blowing the doors off, but when he's on schedule, he can be a pretty dangerous quarterback. So Nebraska's going to have to win early in the early downs, I think, to have a chance to get off the field.
Handley, Bruntz kind of touched on it there. I was going to ask you about Ethan Kaliakmanis. Nebraska's seen him before. He was Minnesota's quarterback the last couple seasons. What kind of stands out about a guy like that isn't maybe the biggest threat passing the ball, but can run just enough that it keeps those RPOs alive, that really kind of gave Nebraska a lot of issues against Illinois?
And I think you nailed it there, Shafe. I think it's his decision-making in the RPO situations where I think that was a big struggle for him. I think Minnesota, as much as they wanted to run the football when he was there was still that emphasis of being a little more balanced. And I think when he was getting into predictable situations, that wasn't his strength. I think being able to get him outside the pocket and being able to use that, basically that experience that he's had, I think has served him well when it does come to the RPO. There's, I think, a lot of comparisons to Luke Altmaier. We heard a lot going into that Nebraska-Illinois game of, Altmaier's propensity to turn the football over the previous year, but was not doing it at that level going into that game. And we saw how effective he was. And I think a lot of the similar traits that also Ethan Kaliakmanis has. And that is that ability to get to the edge, to be another runner when all else breaks down, but also he's making better decisions when they have to throw. I think the ability to get the ball out too, which has served him well, but it would also serve him well in this game, is something that you have to watch, because as far as the matchup and knowing that you can key on Monangai and really try to neutralize him, well, there is where you have to account for what Kaliakmanis can do with his legs and also utilizing just the better decision-making that he's having. To me, it's a concern, and it's kind of an X factor in this football game, that if you feel good about what you're doing with Monangai and the offense for Nebraska is actually able to take advantage and get out in front, I love that for Nebraska. But if they're neutralizing Monangai early on and Kaliakmanis is continuing to move the sticks because he's hurting you, getting to the edge, extending plays, using his athleticism, much like what we saw Luke Altmaier do, to me, that's a problem. So it's one of those things in this offense where he has the luxury of having what I think is a better, more forceful running back, which is crazy to say than what he had in Minnesota because of what they had. But I think the offense he's in right now, I think, is what Minnesota wanted to be the last couple of years that he was in Minneapolis. So I just think he's in a better spot right now. And I think that experience, what he struggled with at Minnesota, I think has actually served him really well in this offense. He's definitely going to be a factor in this game.
BC, what is your level of confidence in Nebraska's special teams coming off of the Purdue game, in which they couldn't kick, snap, hold, down punts inside the 5? Their punter was their leading tackler in the coverage unit. Where are you at with Nebraska's special teams heading into a game against Rutgers, where the Scarlet Knights will be good on special teams?
Yeah. I mean, the obvious answer is I'm not feeling too great about it. With the kicking.
You don't want to lie to the people?
No. I mean, there's phases of it that I feel fine. Like, I know they didn't down the punt, and the gunner situation, probably you mentioned this in our podcast previously in the week, and I think it's a good point. I do feel like return men on punt returns have actually had a little too much space to operate, and so that's something to watch in this game. If there's going to be a positive change here, I think it's going to come with Nebraska's punt return unit in this game, and I'm not saying necessarily an IGC breakout play, maybe, but I think Nebraska has put some heat on punters. And Rule mentioned this. It's forced punters to get rid of it quick and have some like 35-yard nets and stuff like that where it's been off to the side. So I could see Nebraska, you know how sometimes everything's going one way for a unit, and then there's this moment where everybody loses it on Twitter or whatever because something completely different happened. If that were to change, it would be something like that, where they like block a punt or something, because I do think they've gotten close. So I'd watch for that. And then I said it earlier, it's just going to be an interesting sort of cat and mouse game when you get around the 30-yard line on offense, how you want to play it. And we've talked about this previously this week too. If you're going to bring out the field goal unit, it would behoove Nebraska to probably have it happen early, like in the first or second quarter, and just see how that goes. And if it goes in, maybe you give it another try later. And if it doesn't, maybe that influences you from not doing it at all. But if Nebraska gets themselves into like 4th and 10, 4th and 12s, like they did at Purdue, that makes it very tricky. Like everybody always says, like, well, just go for it. But that's easier said than done sometimes when you're like, yeah, but I could try this 38-yarder. And I have seen him make it on a Tuesday. He could do it. So I don't envy them right now with some of those decisions that they'll have to make throughout the rest of this season with that.
It is now time for us to make decisions and predictions as we have reached that portion of the HypeCast here. I will get us started with an oddly specific prediction that I believe in. Nebraska will run a play on Saturday that features Jalen Lloyd coming across the formation, receiving a handoff from one Dylan Raiola. Lloyd will continue running around the offensive line only to pitch the ball back to Ja'Cory Barney, who will be going in the reverse direction. Barney will have the option on the play to throw a pass to Isaiah Nair, who is running a route, but Barney will eschew the pass and instead run for a 27-yard gain on a double reverse on Saturday against Rutgers. And since we want it to be as specific as possible, it will occur in the second quarter.
Wow.
Bruntz.
Wow, I'm not going to get that specific. I think Nebraska will. I think Dylan Raiola will throw a pair of touchdown passes. One will go to Nair, and one will go to Banks. And I think the one to Nair will be about 27 yards. It's going to be kind of over the middle. He's going to beat the safety help's not going to be there, and he's going to win one-on-one, even though that's not really the defense that Rutgers prefers to play. And I think Jamal Banks just makes a grown-ass man catch at the goal line, like a 7-yard touchdown catch, maybe on a slant. I don't know, but he just kind of uses those big hands, just grabs it and wrestles it away after Nebraska has struggled to do that with regularity this year. So he just goes in there with, big man hands, then opens a beer and maybe like breaks a lobster or something like that. But a touchdown for Nair and a touchdown for Banks.
Handley.
Bravo, Bruntz, on the Seinfeld reference there with man hands. One of the things that was talked about from Matt Rule and apparently Ty Robinson with Matt Rule after the game on Saturday was the sack, but the inability to get a strip sack and create the turnover that way. I'm going to go a step further because this is where Ethan Kaliakmanis still can be a little careless with the football. I think there are going to be moments where he is flushed out when they decide to throw. I think Ty Robinson gets a little bit of this on the ball. It comes loose, and then we are going to get one of the greatest feel-good moments of the season to this point. Not Bullock running it back, but Javen Wright scooping it and scoring for Nebraska having a defensive touchdown.
Yeah, that crowd will go nuts. BC, what do you got for us?
Carter Nelson will score the first touchdown of the game. It'll be within the script. Kind of similar to the other one he had, where it'll be about a 23-yard score. They'll have a play that is just set up for him. He's going to have some open space, and he's going to run it in. And I also will say, this is my only positive prediction for special teams, that I'll say they block a punt. They get a hand on one. Like, it goes forward, but it's off to the side it's only like a 17-yard punt because of it. One of those where you don't get all of it, but you get some of it.
BC will release a separate podcast with all of his negative special teams predictions later in the week. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. He's going to call it BC's Breakdowns. All right.
There we go. Pretty good.
Let's pick the click. Brian, what do you got?
Pick the click. Oh, man. I would say I'm going to go with Jamal Banks. I just think this is a game where Bruntz is doing the motion, man hands. Banks you've seen how valuable he is the last couple of weeks, especially. Like, there were those 2 weeks where he sort of disappeared from the stat sheet, but he's just so big on third down. I'm not necessarily saying it's a touchdown or something, but he's going to have like 2 or 3 just big catches that move the chains in key moments. And so I'll say Banks for that reason.
Handley?
I think Nash Hutmacher's a pissed off dude right now. He's getting held a lot. He's still impacting the game. But I think in this game, especially where you're licking your chops and a lot of it is you trying to set that tone up front and in that gap, I think he gets through it. I think he gets a couple TFLs. I think Nash has a huge game. He's my guy.
Bruntz?
I'm going to go with Emmett Johnson. Rutgers comes in giving up 172 a game on the ground. I don't think he's going to get to 100. I think the fact that Chubba Purdy is the last Nebraska player to go for 100 yards in a game continues to stand. But I think Emmett Johnson runs hard late and gets close to 100. I'll say he gets to 87 yards in this one and helps Nebraska to run out the clock.
I'm going to go with what I feel like is a relatively easy one in Dylan Raiola. I mean, Will Rogers threw all over this Rutgers defense last Friday. I think Nebraska is going to be able to move the ball through the air, and I look for it to be the sort of game flow too, where they're going to have to move the ball through the air. And so I think Dylan Raiola is going to have a big game. I think he has a career passing day in terms of total yardage. So give me Dylan Raiola as a pick to click. All right, score predictions. We will go to our guest celebrity picker, Nick Handley. Give me a score prediction for the second most important game on Saturday.
Okay. I see what you did there, because clearly Cleveland's winning 2-0, regardless of who they're playing. For Nebraska, I think that they actually get into control of this one early and hold off Rutgers. So I'm going to go with a 28-24, a little bit of a white knuckle moment there towards the end, but I think Nebraska holds off Rutgers. I'm going to say 28-24. Huskers improve to 5-1 heading into the bye.
Bruntz, what do you got?
Nebraska is able to, there's some tense moments late. Going to have to get a couple stops, but I think it's Nebraska 25, Rutgers 18. I think you can kind of see how Nebraska probably gets to 25. I'm thinking maybe some failed 2-point conversions. I don't know, but yeah, 25-18 Nebraska.
Still need an odd number in there.
Yeah. Well, they got that shot in their bag now.
Yeah, I'm just saying the failed 2-point conversions alone won't get it there. There's something else that's got to happen. BC.
It's hard to predict scores with this team right now because you kind of take field goals out of the equation in your thoughts. So it kind of sucks. By the way, we don't talk enough about how much Isaiah Pacheco must have been driven to have the NFL success he has by losing in championship week to Nebraska in 2020. That should be a separate thought. I'll say Nebraska 28, Rutgers 20. Hard fought game. Huskers get to 5-1. A lot riding on this going into a bye week. That's a long week if you lose. Long week on our message board if those boys don't get it done.
No doubt about it. I have to say, going last in the score prediction leaves you susceptible to basically having very, very similar score. Bruntz went 25-18. I'm coming in with 26-19. Similar idea. Similar. You're not sure how or why they end up with that number. I'm going to say a safety gets involved for Nebraska.
Nice. Yeah.
But the Huskers 26, Rutgers 19. I don't know why. I don't understand it. It'll scroll pretty well, though, if they win that way on Saturday. Handley, any final thoughts for everybody listening at home?
Oh, man. Where do I start? It's just good to be back with you guys. It's great to see all your guys' faces, too. So, and enjoy the baseball, some of us.
Yeah, just some of us.
Yeah. You'll have to let us know what the score is. I won't be watching.
Yeah.
I have my iPad going on.
I feel like Mike's going to let you know. Yeah, Shafe will let you know. It'll be fine.
You'll be by me. You'll know. Bruntz is going to have to get to the stadium earlier than he wants. It's bad for everybody on Saturday. So, Bruntz, you have anything you want to add before we depart here?
No, I'm good. I think we covered a lot of ground here. All good. We pronounced names correctly. It feels like that's kind of a challenge for Rutgers.
I avoided it. I know how to say the quarterback's name. That's it.
Yeah. I was doing some warm-up exercises beforehand to make sure I was pronouncing them correctly.
One more time.
Manungai.
Yeah. Manungai.
BC?
No, I already got my Isaiah Pacheco comment in. So that was a 2020 reference if people didn't. Championship week, Nebraska.
That's better than most of our references, which tend to fall in that 1996 category.
Yeah, that most of my references are there. So it's good that I'm getting more current.
Yep.
Dedrick Mills ran wild in that game.
He did. And don't forget, Wan'Dale Robinson had his first touchdown of the season in that game.
Turner Corcoran's first start as a Husker.
Excitement.
Yeah.
They were trending towards a bowl game.
Then everybody else want to go hunting.
People listening to this right now are just slamming their heads into a wall, a table, a door, whatever they can. That was not great times for Nebraska or the world at large. Great times are had on Husker247 every single day. Get to Husker247.com. Thank you for those that watch and listen through YouTube. Please like and subscribe. We appreciate it. We appreciate all of you over there watching everything we have going on over at YouTube. And if you are a podcast listener, feel free to subscribe. Have the podcast downloaded to your listening device. You don't have to do anything. It'll pop up every time we have new content. Speaking of new content, we're going to talk some basketball this week. BC and I are going to get together. The Husker247 HypeCast is being revitalized. Basketball has a season opening exhibition of sorts on Friday. They do not have a has-been or no-named rapper this year attached with the festivities. So unfortunately, that won't be part of it. But we'll have some podcast content on basketball as well. Of course, we'll have the post-game podcast, the Sunday side session, which will be manned by Michael Bruntz, I believe, on Sunday as well. So plenty of podcast content. Plenty of stuff can be found at Husker247. For Nick Handley, Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson, I'm Mike Schaefer. We appreciate your time. We'll catch you next.